In the quiet village of Nianda, there lived a little girl named Aisha. She was about 10 years old, small and thin, with bright eyes that always seemed to carry a question. Her mother, Zuri, was a kind woman who worked hard every day, but the people of Nianda did not see her kindness. They saw her past. They saw her mistakes. And for that they whispered. Everyone in the village knew Zuri's story. Some said she had once worked in the nearby town and done things to survive that a good woman should not do. Others said she had been left by a man who promised her love and never returned. No one really knew the truth, but that did not stop them from talking. They called her names when they thought she could not hear. They said, "Her daughter will be just like her one day." Aisha heard those words more times than she could count. When she tried to play with other children, their mothers called them back. When she went to fetch water at the well, people moved away. Even in school, the other girls laughed at her clothes and whispered about her mother. But Aisha was not the kind of girl who gave up easily. She loved to learn. She loved stories, especially the ones about brave people who rose above what others thought of them. Her favorite place was under the big old baobab tree that stood near the edge of the village. Its branches were wide and strong, like arms ready to hold anyone who needed comfort. Every evening, after finishing her chores, Aisha would sit there with her books. The pages were torn, the ink faint, but she read them again and again. Sometimes her mother joined her. They would sit quietly watching the sun fall behind the hills, painting the sky orange and gold. Zuri would smile softly and say, "My child, one day the sun will rise for you in a better place." Aisha would nod, though she did not fully understand what her mother meant. All she knew was that she wanted to make her proud. She wanted to show everyone that being Zuri's daughter was not something to be ashamed of. One morning, as Aisha walked to school, she passed by a group of women talking. They stopped when she approached. One of them, an old woman with sharp eyes, said loudly, "Look, there goes the child of sin." The others laughed. Aisha felt her heart tighten, but she did not cry. She simply kept walking. At school she worked harder than everyone else. Her teacher, Mr. Kato, noticed her effort. "You are a bright girl, Aisha," he told her one day. "Never let the world tell you who you are." Those words became a secret light inside her. Whenever people mocked her, she repeated them quietly, "Never let the world tell you who you are." Zuri did her best to give her daughter a good life, even when times were hard. Some nights they had only a small bowl of porridge to share. But Zuri always smiled and said, "We still have each other, and that is enough." Despite everything, there were moments of happiness. On rainy days, Aisha and her mother danced barefoot outside their small hut. On sunny mornings, they washed clothes by the river and sang songs together. When they laughed, it was as if the whole world disappeared. Only the two of them remained. Still, deep down, Aisha wished things could be different. She wished people could see her mother the way she did, gentle, strong, and kind. But she was too young to change the minds of grown people who held on to gossip like treasure. One day, a festival was announced in Nianda. There would be music, food, and dancing. Children were asked to perform a small play about the first people who settled the village. Aisha wanted to join more than anything. She had always loved stories, and she dreamed of standing on stage, speaking proudly in front of everyone. When she told her mother, Zuri smiled and said, "If you want it, go and ask. The worst they can do is say no." So Aisha gathered her courage and went to the meeting. The elders sat in a circle, discussing who would perform. When she raised her hand, the room fell silent. The head elder, a man named Baraka, looked at her coldly. "You wish to join, Aisha?" "Yes, elder," she said softly. "I can play the girl who welcomes the first settlers." There was a murmur of voices. One woman shook her head. "We cannot let her take part," she said. "She is Zuri's daughter." Aisha felt her face burn. She wanted to speak, to say she had done nothing wrong. But her throat felt tight, and her words stayed trapped inside. Baraka sighed. "Perhaps next year," he said, and moved on to the next name. Aisha left quietly, her heart heavy. That night, she sat by the baobab tree and cried. Her mother came and sat beside her. For a long time neither of them spoke. Then Zuri said softly, "Do not let their words steal your spirit, my child. Remember what I told you, the sun will rise for you one day." Aisha looked up at the stars. They seemed so far away but also so steady. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe one day she could shine too. After that night, Aisha studied even harder. She wanted to leave Nianda, to find a place where her name would mean something good. Every morning she swept the house, fetched water, and helped her mother. Then she read until her eyes grew tired. She dreamed of becoming a teacher or a doctor, someone who could help others. Sometimes when she walked through the village, she saw Juma, the chief's son. He would smile shyly, but he never spoke to her in front of others. Aisha understood. He was afraid of what people would say. It hurt, but she did not blame him. Days turned into months, and Aisha's heart grew stronger. She began to see the whispers and laughter differently. They were no longer chains, they were challenges. Every cruel word became a reason to rise higher. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, she told her mother, "One day, Mama, I will leave this place. I will make you proud." Zuri smiled, though her eyes were wet. "You already make me proud, my child," she said. "You already have." The wind rustled through the baobab leaves, carrying the faint sound of drums from the village. Aisha looked toward the sound but did not move. For her, the real festival was not in the laughter of those who had mocked her, it was in the quiet strength she carried within. And though she was still young, deep in her heart she knew one truth: no one could decide her destiny but her. That night, under the soft glow of the moon, Aisha whispered to herself, "They can hate me, they can laugh at me, but one day they will know my name." Her voice was gentle, but her spirit was fierce. And as the stars watched over the small girl and her mother sitting beneath the baobab tree, it was as if the universe itself listened, and silently promised that her time would come. The season of harvest came again to the small village of Nianda. The fields were golden, the air smelled of roasted maize, and drums echoed from one end of the village to the other. Everyone was busy preparing for the harvest festival, the biggest celebration of the year. There would be songs, dances, games, and food for everyone. For most people it was a time of joy and unity. But for Aisha, it was a time filled with both excitement and fear. Every year the festival brought together all the villagers, young and old. The young girls practiced traditional dances, and the boys prepared to drum and sing. Aisha had always loved to dance. She often practiced alone by the river, copying the movements she saw other girls perform. Her body moved with grace and rhythm, her bare feet stirring the dust as she spun and smiled. But she had never been allowed to join the real dancers. This year she thought things might be different. She was older now, more confident, and her teacher, Mr. Kato, had told her that she had great talent. "You have spirit in your steps, Aisha," he said once, smiling kindly. "That cannot be taught." His words stayed in her heart, giving her courage. So one morning, Aisha went to the village square, where the elders were choosing the festival performers. The sun was bright and many people had gathered to watch. The girls stood in a line, each hoping to be chosen. Aisha waited quietly at the end, her hands trembling but her heart full of hope. When her turn came, she stepped forward. Her voice was soft but steady. "Elders, I would like to join the dance group this year." The murmurs began immediately. Some women looked at her with wide eyes. A few men exchanged knowing glances. One of the elders, a tall man named Baraka, frowned. "You," he said slowly, "the daughter of Zuri?" Aisha nodded, trying to stand tall. "Yes, elder. I can dance well. I have been practicing." Baraka let out a short laugh that echoed across the square. "The daughter of Zuri cannot dance before the spirits," he said. "The festival is sacred. We cannot let shame dance in the circle." The crowd laughed. The sound was sharp and cruel, like stones hitting her heart. Aisha's face grew hot. She looked around, hoping someone would speak for her. Her eyes found Juma, the chief's son. He was standing near the drummers, his hands clasped together. For a moment their eyes met. Aisha's gaze begged for kindness, for help, for just one voice to say, "Let her dance." But Juma looked away. He said nothing. The laughter continued. One of the women, her arms crossed, said, "She should be thankful we even let her come here. Does she think she can stand where good girls stand?" Aisha lowered her head. The tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She took a small step back, then another, until she was out of the circle. The laughter faded behind her as she walked home, her feet heavy, her heart breaking a little more with every step. When she reached her small hut at the edge of the village, Zuri was outside washing clothes. She saw her daughter's face and knew something had happened. "What is it, my child?" she asked gently. Aisha could not speak. She fell into her mother's arms and cried. The sobs came deep and hard, shaking her small body. Zuri held her tightly, running her hand through her hair. She did not need to ask, she already knew. When Aisha could finally speak, she whispered, "They laughed at me, Mama. They said I cannot dance because of you." Her voice trembled with hurt. Even Juma said nothing. Zuri sighed. She looked out toward the fading sun, her eyes tired but calm. "Let them talk, my child," she said softly. "People always find it easy to judge what they do not understand." "But why, Mama?" Aisha asked, her voice breaking. Why do they hate us so much? What did I do wrong? You did nothing wrong, Zuri said firmly. She lifted Aisha's chin and wiped her tears. They hate what they fear. They fear what is different. They see your strength and it reminds them of what they lost in themselves: kindness, courage, and hope. Aisha sniffed, still hurt. I only wanted to dance. I wanted to show them that I belong. Zuri smiled sadly. You belong, Aisha. You just don't belong to their small circle. You belong to something bigger, to the world that waits beyond this village. The wind blew softly through the trees. The sound of distant drums carried over the hills, calling the villagers to rehearse. Aisha looked toward the sound, her chest heavy. For the first time, the music that once made her happy now made her feel small. Zuri stood up and took her daughter's hand. Come, she said. I want to show you something. They walked to the old baobab tree near the river, the same place where Aisha always studied. The branches swayed gently above them, casting long shadows across the ground. Zuri sat down and Aisha sat beside her. When I was young, Zuri began, I too dreamed of dancing in the festival. But life had other plans for me. I made choices that others never forgave me for. Some of those choices were mistakes, yes. But others were made out of need, out of hunger, out of survival. Still, they remember only the bad. And because they cannot forgive me, they punish you. Aisha looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. That's not fair. It isn't, Zuri agreed. But fairness is not something you can wait for. You must make your own way, my child. She looked up at the sky where the first stars were starting to appear. You have light in you. Do not let their darkness take it away. They sat there quietly for a while, listening to the sound of the river. Fireflies danced in the air, tiny lights flickering in the growing dark. Aisha felt the cool evening wind on her face. She was still sad, but something inside her began to shift. Her mother's words planted a small seed of strength in her heart. Later that night, Aisha lay awake, staring at the roof made of grass and bamboo. The sound of drums echoed faintly in the distance. The other girls were still practicing. She closed her eyes and imagined herself there, not as the unwanted child, but as a dancer moving freely beneath the moonlight. In her dream, she danced alone, but she was not afraid. Her steps were strong, her arms graceful. She could hear the rhythm of her own heartbeat guiding her. The crowd that had once laughed now watched in silence. The chief's son Juma was among them, his eyes full of regret. But Aisha did not dance for him, nor for the elders. She danced for herself, for her mother, for every whisper that once made her hide her face. When she woke up, the morning sun was shining through the small window. Zuri was already outside, sweeping the yard. Aisha smiled faintly. She felt lighter, stronger. That day, as she passed the other villagers, she kept her head high. The same people who had laughed at her whispered again, but this time, their words no longer hurt as much. She knew something they didn't, that her worth did not depend on their approval. One day she told herself they would speak her name not with scorn, but with respect. One day the same drums that had mocked her would beat in her honor. She didn't know how, but she believed it with all her heart. And as she walked past the baobab tree, she whispered to the wind, they may laugh today, but tomorrow they will remember me. The wind seemed to answer softly, carrying her promise through the village, a promise that one day she would rise above them all. The end. A few years passed, and the girl who once cried beneath the baobab tree was no longer the same. Aisha had grown taller, her eyes calmer, and her dreams stronger. The small village of Nianda, with its narrow paths and endless whispers, had become too small for the fire that burned inside her. She knew she had to leave, not because she hated her village, but because she needed space to become who she was meant to be. The day she left, the sky was pale and still. Her mother, Zuri, stood by the edge of the dusty road with a small bundle in her hands. Inside it were Aisha's few clothes, a book, and some dried cassava. You are ready, my child, Zuri said softly, though her voice trembled. Do not forget where you come from, but do not let it chain you either. Aisha hugged her mother tightly. I will make you proud, she whispered. I already am, Zuri replied, smiling through her tears. The bus to the city of Kisumu arrived, its tires kicking up clouds of red dust. Aisha climbed aboard, her heart pounding. As the bus rolled away, she looked back and saw her mother still standing there, waving until she became just a small figure in the distance. The city was loud, crowded, and full of smells Aisha had never known: roasted corn, smoke, sweat, and rain. Tall buildings loomed above her, and people rushed past without looking. For a girl who had grown up in a quiet village, Kisumu felt like another world. But Aisha was not afraid. She was determined. Her first months were hard. She found a small room to rent in the back of a market, where she shared a bathroom with 6 other people. The nights were noisy and sometimes she could not sleep. During the day she worked as a cleaner at a small clinic near the bus station. She scrubbed floors, washed windows and emptied trash bins. It was tiring work, but she was grateful to be close to people who helped others. Every time she passed the doctors and nurses in their white coats, she felt something stir inside her. She watched them carefully, how they spoke gently to patients, how they moved quickly to save lives. She dreamed of wearing that white coat one day, of being someone who could make a difference. After work, when most people went home to rest, Aisha went to a small adult school nearby. The building was old and dimly lit, but it was filled with people like her, dreamers who wanted more from life. She sat in the front row every evening, her pen moving fast across her notebook. She studied math, English, and science. She did not have much money, but the teacher, seeing her dedication, let her pay little by little. One evening, as Aisha cleaned the clinic, she heard a voice behind her. "You are the girl who studies at night, aren't you?" She turned and saw a tall man wearing glasses and a gentle smile. He was one of the doctors. His name was Dr. Cato. He often stayed late at the clinic, helping patients long after others had gone home. "Yes, doctor," she replied shyly. "I am studying after work." Dr. Cato nodded. "I have seen you working very hard," he said. "You remind me of myself when I was young. I also came from a small village, but I wanted to help people." Aisha looked down, embarrassed but proud. "I want to be a doctor too someday," she said quietly. He smiled. "Then you must never stop trying." From that day on, Dr. Cato began to take notice of her. Sometimes, when the clinic was not too busy, he let her sit in his office and watch him work. He explained small things to her, how to measure blood pressure, how to clean wounds, how to comfort frightened patients. Aisha listened with full attention. Every new thing she learned felt like a small door opening. She began reading medical books in her free time, borrowing them from the clinic's shelf. At night, under the dim light of her small lamp, she would read until her eyes grew heavy. Years passed like that. Slowly her world began to change. Dr. Cato saw her determination and helped her apply for a scholarship at a nursing school. When she received the acceptance letter, she ran all the way to the clinic to tell him. He laughed with joy and said, "I knew it. I knew you would make it." Aisha's studies were not easy. There were days when she felt tired, hungry, and ready to give up. But she always remembered her mother's words, "You belong to something bigger." She thought of Zuri's face, her quiet strength, and it gave her courage to keep going. She wrote letters to her mother often. The letters were full of stories about the city, her studies, and the people she met. Zuri kept every one of them, reading them again and again under the baobab tree. After 4 long years, Aisha graduated. The day she put on her white coat for the first time, she looked at herself in the mirror and almost cried. It was not just a coat, it was proof that she had climbed a mountain everyone said was too high for her. Her first job was in a community clinic on the edge of the city. The people there were poor and often came from villages like Nianda. Some could not pay, but Aisha treated them anyway. She cleaned wounds, gave medicine, and held the hands of mothers whose children were sick. She never forgot what it felt like to be looked down on. That memory made her gentle. People trusted her quickly. Soon the name Dr. Aisha became known not just in the clinic but in nearby areas too. One day, while she was treating a small boy who had fallen from a bicycle, Dr. Cato visited her. He watched her work, smiling proudly. "You have become more than I expected," he said. Aisha smiled. "You show me the way, doctor. Without you, I would still be cleaning floors." He shook his head. "No, Aisha. You would have found your way no matter what. Some lights are too bright to hide." That evening, after everyone left, Aisha sat alone in the clinic, thinking about her journey. She remembered the village, the whispers, the laughter. She remembered Juma, the chief's son, who stayed silent when she needed a friend. And she remembered her mother, who believed in her when no one else did. A warm tear slipped down her cheek, but it was not from sadness. It was from gratitude, for every hardship that had pushed her forward. As night fell, she stepped outside. The city lights sparkled like stars on the ground. Somewhere far away, she knew her mother was looking at the same sky. In that moment, Aisha whispered softly, "Mama, I did it." The wind brushed her face, gentle and cool, as if carrying her mother's voice from miles away. "I always knew you would." From then on, Aisha worked harder than ever. She opened a small clinic for the poor, hiring people who needed a second chance. Cleaners, students, widows. She never forgot where she came from, and she never let anyone feel small in her presence. People in Kisumu began calling her the healer with a kind heart. But in her own heart she was still the girl from Nyanda, the girl who once stood under the baobab tree and promised herself that one day she would make them remember her name. And now she had done exactly that. The news reached Aisha one morning while she was at her clinic in Kisumu. A young man from Nyanda had come to the city to seek help. His face was thin and his eyes were tired. "Doctor," he said weakly, "our village is suffering. People are sick, many are dying. We do not know what it is. Please help us." For a moment Aisha could not speak. The name of her village, the place she had left behind years ago, echoed in her mind like a distant drum. Nyanda. Her home. The same village that had laughed at her mother, the same place that had cast her aside. And now it was calling for her help. She felt a storm of emotions rise inside her, pain, anger, and something deeper, something softer. She took a deep breath and said, "I will come." That evening she packed her medical bag. Her assistants tried to stop her. "Doctor, the sickness might be dangerous," one said. Another added, "You have patients here. Send someone else." But Aisha shook her head. "Nyanda is my home. I must go." The journey back took half a day. As the bus rolled down the familiar red dirt roads, she looked out the window. The fields, the hills, the river, all of it looked the same yet so different. Memories returned in waves, her mother's laughter, the whispers of the villagers, the pain of rejection. She wondered what they would say when they saw her now, wearing the white coat they once said she could never earn. When she stepped off the bus at Nyanda's small station, people stopped and stared. Some recognized her immediately. They whispered to each other, eyes wide with disbelief. "Is that Aisha?" one woman asked. "Zuri's daughter?" She carried her bag and walked through the market. The same women who had once gossiped about her now watched silently. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, curious about the woman in the neat coat who carried herself with calm confidence. At the edge of the village she saw a group of sick people lying under the trees, coughing and shivering. Their skin looked pale and weak. The smell of sickness filled the air. Without wasting a moment, Aisha knelt beside them. "Bring me water," she said firmly, "and some clean cloths." No one moved at first. They just stared. It was as if they could not believe she was real. Then a man stepped forward, an old farmer who had once thrown insults at her mother. "Doctor," he said softly, "we are sorry. Please, help us." Aisha nodded without a word. She began to work. She cleaned wounds, gave medicine, and comforted the sick. Her hands moved quickly but gently. The villagers watched as she moved from one patient to another, her voice calm, her face kind. Word spread quickly. "Aisha has returned," people said. "She is helping everyone." Soon the whole village came to see her. Some brought sick relatives, others came just to look at the woman they once despised. Even the chief's house sent a messenger to ask for help. Juma, now the village leader, was ill too. When Aisha heard his name, she paused for a moment. Memories flashed, the day he had stayed silent while the elders mocked her. The pain of that moment still lived inside her, though she had buried it long ago. But now, as a doctor, she knew what she must do. She walked to the chief's house. When she entered, she saw Juma lying on a mat, sweating and weak. His eyes widened when he saw her. He tried to sit up, but she stopped him gently. "Don't move," she said softly. He looked ashamed. "Aisha, I never thought you would come back," he whispered. "I didn't come for thanks," she said. "I came to heal." She checked his pulse, gave him medicine, and wiped his forehead. He watched her quietly, guilt heavy in his eyes. "You should hate me," he said. "After what I did, after how I stayed silent." Aisha paused, then smiled faintly. "Hate is heavy," she said. "I have carried enough weight in my life. I do not need more." For days Aisha worked tirelessly. Morning to night she moved through the village treating the sick. Some cases were hard, but slowly the sickness began to fade. The people who once avoided her now ran to bring her food, water, and supplies. Children followed her with smiles. The same voices that once whispered insults now spoke her name with respect. One night, as the moon rose high, Aisha sat outside her small tent near the clinic she had set up. The air was cool and filled with the sounds of crickets. She looked toward the hill where her old home once stood. The memories of her mother returned, strong and warm. "Mama," she whispered to the wind, "you were right. They do speak my name now, and not with shame." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. She felt her mother's spirit close, as if Zuri was sitting beside her under the same stars they once watched together. The next morning, Juma came to see her. He had recovered and was walking again, though slowly. He stopped in front of her and bowed his head. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You saved all of us." Aisha looked at him calmly. "I only did what anyone should do." "No," Juma said, his voice full of regret. "You did more than we deserved. We treated you like dirt. We called your mother names. We turned our backs on you. And yet, you returned to help us." Aisha's eyes softened. "My mother taught me that kindness is stronger than hate. You were blind, but now you see. That is enough." He nodded slowly. "Nianda will never forget this. You have changed us." In the days that followed, the village began to recover. People returned to their farms, children laughed again, and the smell of food replaced the smell of sickness. But something deeper had changed too. The people no longer looked at Aisha as the prostitute's daughter. They saw her as their savior, their doctor, their hope. They built a small clinic in the center of the village using wood and clay. On the first day it opened, they asked Aisha to cut the ribbon. As she stood before the crowd, the people clapped and cheered. She smiled, holding back tears. "This is not my victory alone," she said simply. "It belongs to my mother, who believed in me when no one else did." The crowd grew silent. Many bowed their heads, ashamed of how they had treated Zuri. That evening, when the sun turned the sky red, Aisha walked to the baobab tree, the same one where she used to read and dream as a child. The tree was older now, its roots thicker, its branches stronger. She placed her hand on its rough bark and closed her eyes. "I came back, Mama," she whispered. "I kept my promise." A soft breeze moved through the leaves, and for a moment she felt as if her mother was there, proud, smiling, at peace. As she walked back toward the village, she could hear laughter and singing in the distance. It was not mockery this time, it was joy, gratitude, and respect. The same people who had once turned away from her were now waiting to celebrate her. Aisha smiled. She knew her journey was not over. There would always be more people to heal, more hearts to mend. But for now she felt something she had longed for all her life: belonging. The girl they had once called a curse had become their greatest blessing. And under the wide African sky, filled with stars and stories, the village of Nianda finally learned what true grace looked like. The sun rose gently over Nianda, spreading golden light across the land. The sickness had finally ended. The air, which had once carried the smell of medicine and sorrow, now smelled of new beginnings. Children laughed again, goats bleated in the distance, and the sound of pounding grain returned to the huts. Life had returned, and with it came a feeling of peace that the people had not known for months. Aisha stood outside the small clinic she had built during the sickness. Her white coat was dusty, her face tired, but her eyes were calm. The people of the village began to gather around her. They came slowly, unsure of what to say. Some brought fruits, others flowers, and some came with nothing but shame in their hearts. They formed a circle around her, the same way they used to when they gossiped about her and her mother years ago. But now their eyes were different. There was no hate, no laughter, only regret. The chief, Juma, stepped forward first. He looked thinner, older, and the weight of guilt hung on his shoulders. He opened his mouth, but his voice trembled. "Aisha," he said softly, "we cannot undo what we did. We hurt you and your mother. We turned our backs when you needed us most." Aisha listened quietly. Her hands were folded in front of her, and her eyes looked not at Juma but beyond him, toward the hills where her mother's spirit rested. "I remember," she said gently. "But I also remember my mother's words. She told me never to let anger fill my heart. She said love is stronger than pain. That is what saved me." Tears filled the eyes of many villagers. Some women began to sob quietly. A man who had once shouted insults at Zuri fell to his knees. "We were blind," he cried. "We saw only her past, not her heart. And we judged you for it. Forgive us." Aisha stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I forgave you long ago," she said. "If I had not, I would never have found peace." The villagers began to murmur among themselves. One of the elders, an old woman named Mumbai, raised her staff and spoke. "Zuri's daughter has healed not only our bodies but also our hearts. We must honor her mother, who raised such a woman." The people agreed. That very evening, they decided to build a new clinic, larger and stronger than the small hut Aisha had been using. They would name it after Zuri, the woman they had scorned, yet whose love had given Nianda its savior. As they began to clear the ground, Aisha stood aside and watched. The sound of hammers and voices filled the air. It was a sound of unity, something she had never thought she would hear in this village. Juma came to her again, his head bowed. "I have lived with shame every day," he said. When I see you, I remember how cowardly I was. I liked you once, but I was too weak to stand by you. I let others decide who you were. Now I see the truth, you were stronger than all of us. Aisha looked at him kindly. You were young, she said. We all make choices that we regret. What matters is what we learn from them. He nodded slowly. I want to make things right. From this day, Nyanda will teach its children never to hate anyone because of their birth. That will be our promise. Aisha smiled. That is all I could ask for. When the clinic was finished, the people gathered once more. They painted the name Zuri Health Center on a wooden sign above the door. It was simple, but to Aisha, it was beautiful. She traced the letters with her fingers, feeling a deep warmth in her chest. This place, she said softly, will stand for healing, not only of the body but of the heart. That night, the villagers held a feast. The air was filled with music and laughter. Children danced, and the elders clapped their hands to the beat of drums. The smell of roasted maize and goat meat spread through the air. Aisha sat quietly on a small stool, watching the joy around her. It was strange. The same people who once looked away when she passed were now calling her name with love and gratitude. A young girl came running to her with a flower crown and placed it on her head. You are our hero, the girl said shyly. Aisha laughed gently. No, little one. I am just someone who learned to forgive. Later, as the fire burned low and the stars appeared, Juma stood up to speak. Years ago, he began, we hated a woman and her child because of our pride. We thought we were better than them. But today we stand here because that same child saved our lives. Aisha, you have shown us what true strength looks like. From this day on, Nyanda will never forget. The crowd clapped and cheered. Aisha looked down for a moment, her eyes shining with tears. She thought of her mother again, her soft voice, her smile, her love. If only she could see this day. When the feast ended, Aisha walked alone to the baobab tree where she used to sit as a child. The night was quiet and the wind whispered through the leaves. She sat under the tree and closed her eyes. Mama, she whispered, they remember you now? They finally see you for who you were. The wind blew softly, brushing her cheek as if in answer. She smiled through her tears. The next morning she opened the clinic for the first time. A long line of people waited outside. Mothers with children, old men, farmers, and even travelers from nearby villages. The first patient she treated was a little boy with a fever. As she worked, she felt peace fill her heart. She no longer felt like an outcast. She was part of Nyanda again, not because they accepted her but because she had accepted them. Days turned into weeks and the clinic became the heart of the village. People came not only for medicine but for comfort. Aisha listened to their stories, healed their wounds, and taught them how to stay healthy. Her laughter filled the halls, and her kindness became a light that everyone admired. One afternoon, as she sat outside the clinic, a group of children gathered around her. They asked her to tell them stories about her mother. She smiled and began to speak, her voice soft and warm. She told them how her mother always said, "The heart that forgives is the heart that wins." The children listened closely, their eyes wide. And that, Aisha finished, is why we must never judge others by their past. Everyone has a story we do not know. The children nodded. One of them asked, Dr. Aisha, will you teach us to help people too? She smiled brightly. Yes, she said. That is why I am here. Years later, when Aisha was gone, the people of Nyanda still spoke her name with love. The clinic continued to serve the poor, and her story was told to every child born in the village. They learned that hate brings only pain, but kindness can heal even the deepest wounds. And so, under the wide African sky where the baobab tree still stood strong, the lesson of Aisha and her mother lived on, whispered from one generation to another. Never hate a soul for the sins of another.